Luis DeComo was the speaker at the New York Brand Safety Summit, and he was asked by Rob Rakowitz of GARM what his ask of the industry would be, and thought he put it very well. He said, "My number one ask, please check your inclusion and exclusion lists. Don't just avoid the bad, but raise up those that need more investment, whether those are DE&I creators or it's good journalism. If we do that, we'll create a more trusted and valid media landscape." So, Luis, thank you for stating that, and thank you for putting that out there and issuing the challenge to all of us in industry. The interesting thing is, if that's what's wrong, how did we get there? And if we know how we got there, then we can work out how we're going to create solutions and move to a better place. So what I'd like to just share with you a little bit about the sort of journey that got us to this point where, frankly, despite our well-intentioned efforts, we were doing some things that were harmful to certain communities and societies in the advertising market and more broadly in our communities and culture. The best way to explain it is I'd call it the 3 ages of digital. The first age is really that age of chaos. Do you remember when we had like video everywhere? And because we had video everywhere and the expansion of the social media platforms, and it was wonderful and everyone's got 4G and Wi-Fi access in the whole world? We had video everywhere, so we had ads everywhere. But they were in a very random and unregulated way. So what happened is you could have an ad next to content that was inappropriate. So for an advertiser, you had both non-viewable ads, you had fraud, you had a limited ad experience, you had limited metrics, you had PII risk, and you had misaligned content. Awful to see, for example, an automotive advertising next to a car crash content. Worst case would be something totally grotesque, like a terrorist piece of content with a brand next to it. So adjacency matters. So chaos was unfortunate. It was bad. It was bad for brands. It was bad for the media landscape. And it really required a change. And so what happened as an industry is our response to chaos was to be cautious. So this industry response to this era of being cautious was basically to put new policies and heightened controls in place and basically try and limit all the bad stuff. So for the advertiser, this meant we created viewability standards and brand safety requirements and keyword lists and exclusions and bans and limitations on language. And then groups like the WFA and GARM and the ANA and various advertising associations around the world came up with standards. Nearly all those standards were based on excluding stuff that could potentially be harmful. So it was well-intentioned, but what it clearly did is it had some unintended consequences. And probably the biggest of these were it sort of overblocked and it limited content that could be seen and monetized. It created inclusion lists that weren't inclusive because those audiences weren't allowed. It underfunded news. And as we know with the echo chamber, virality actually beats positivity. So stuff that was sensational, toxic, and scary got more amplification by the algos on social media platforms than the responsible and the positive. So what we did is we basically accelerated a toxic environment in the interest of trying to be cautious and safe. Not good. The challenge for us as an industry, for all of us, is we need to combine being responsibly safe, but also with being inclusive and equitable. And we have to find the way, because we started out with this era of exclusion and block everything just in case, into this era of inclusion where we have to be able to be appropriate, to be intentional, including the content we should use. I'll give you one example just to dramatize. My son has a bearded dragon, Australian lizard. Love it. He also has cockroaches, not so keen on the cockroaches. But anyway, of the reptile, wonderful, great experience, good for him to learn to care for a pet, etc. Videos about tropical reptiles are currently deemed unsafe. Why? Well, actually, it's because there was one very awful person that did one very disgusting act with one reptile one time, which then led it to be potentially seen as being a bad word and therefore a bad context. So what we have is this sort of principle of the keyword covers the worst case example, but what it does is in that catches up lots of other content. And that's what has been creating a problem. So what we have to do to get beyond this is really understand this transition from being broad keyword exclusion-based into being responsibly inclusion-based. And that brings us from chaos to cautious to conscious. And conscious is being conscious of all the aspects of a creator and a piece of content, and also how we judge it and how the communities around us think and process it. So we can avoid the negative and we can align with the positive. And so that allows us to build intentional, inclusive inclusion lists and solve these problems of overblocking created by overcaution. So The 3 C's is really the explanation of how we got to where we are today and the road and the path for the road ahead. So chaos to cautious, cautious goes to conscious. What's interesting is when we think about conscious, it really is a state of mind. And it's a state of mind where, frankly, by being conscious, you notice or realize something's happening. You're more likely to consider or appraise. You're likely to be concerned or interested. What that means for us and everybody in this audience is that it matters, because if we now know but we choose not to act, we're part of the problem. Now the fact that we do know what it is, we have the option to act, we can now drive this migration from exclusion to inclusion. The first point of being conscious is we're now aware. The second point is, do we do something about it? And my appeal to all of us is, let's be compelled to take a stand, to shine a light on this inequity and actually lead this journey to more appropriate, sustainable, inclusive go forward for the way we think about advertising, the way we think about social media, and for the role of marketing in the broader good of society and people and planet.